A great weekend. And for our final session, Bob O.
Thank you. I just had to put this on again to work. Yep. Good. Okay. So we talked about going out and making amends. And what I'd like to talk about this morning is the last 3 steps in AA, but particularly the 10th step. And the reason why is because the longer you're sober, if you continue to engage in this thing, the more you're going to use that step. What the step says is continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when you see it, ask God at once to remove it. Talk to someone about it. Make amends if you've harmed someone, and then resolutely turn your thoughts to someone you can help. Those are the instructions. In the 10th step, it also talks about a new position with alcohol. It talks about neutrality. It says we're neither for it or against it. It ceases to be an issue. If you would have told me that when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous that alcohol would cease to be an issue, I would have thought you would have been looking for a fight. Because alcohol had been such an intimate part of my life for so long that the whole idea that I could somehow go through my life without thinking about a drink all the time was just absurd. But the truth is that I'm neutral to alcohol today. I go to business meetings where they serve drinks. I go to restaurants and bars. I go to most of these bars are serving food. And looking at alcohol for me today is like looking at dog food. I don't have a dog. So, I mean, it's kind of irrelevant. I just don't do it. Now, I can't tell you how diametrically opposed to my mentality when I was drinking that is. Alcohol's just not a deal for me. When last time I got married, we had a reception in a very nice restaurant with an open bar because my father-in-law had really enjoyed drinking. And it's fine for me. Sometimes if I'm dating some lady and she drinks, sometimes it becomes problematic. Mostly, well, anyway, it becomes problematic. But not all the time. I don't care if they take a drink. I'm the one with the problem. So if they drink and they can do that reasonably, I don't care. I don't have alcohol in my house today because I can't think of why I would do that. I'm not a real social person. I'm kind of a loner. Huh?
Imagine that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I live alone half the time and with my kids the other half the time, and I don't drink, and I don't want them to drink. At least until they're old enough to drink. And then they get to make their own decisions. But I'm not... I don't have some sort of Carrie Nation attitude where I tell everybody else what they have to do. That just makes people angry. So, but I don't have social events at my house that require alcohol. Now, about 6 months ago, my ex-brother-in-law, my ex-wife was having a whole bunch of her relatives over, and she called me and asked me if the brother-in-law could stay at my house because he just has a terrible snoring habit. And well, that's, she's a sweet lady. And so I said, absolutely. He can stay in the bedroom down at the end of the hall, and if we close the door, I'm not even going to be aware that he's there, no matter how loud he snores. So he came over, and I thought, well, I know he really likes to drink beer. This guy's a fireman from San Diego. And so I bought a 6-pack of Heineken's or some kind of really good beer, and put it in the refrigerator for him, and he drank one bottle, and that was the end of it. And I mean, after he left, I'm looking at that beer in the refrigerator going, now what the hell do I do with that? And doesn't beer get kind of skunky if you let it hang around long enough? I mean, it doesn't age well, does it? You guys never let it sit that long, right? So I took the other 5 bottles and went over to the neighbors and said, here. The truth is, if you do the steps in Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't have to be obsessed with alcohol. I've never seen a real drunk that went through this stuff that when they, by the time they were done, that they still had this just obsession about needing to drink and being afraid to be around it. And the book says that if you can't divest yourself through this process of that obsession, you still have the mind of an alcoholic. And then they talk about some guy trying to get away from everything and gets on the Greenland ice cap, and some Eskimo with a bottle would find him anyway. But the real truth is that there is an exception there, and the exception's the story of Dr. Bob, where he said that he did not lose his obsession for over 2 years. My experience with this is that if people go through the steps, that they will lose their obsession, and then they get neutral to alcohol, and that's such a gift. So let's talk about how do you do the 10th step. So it says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, and when you see it, you ask God at once to remove it. You talk to someone about it. And let's just go there. If you've written inventory out of the book, you will know what selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear feels like, because you re-experienced it. The book talks about reliving things for others' benefit. And so when we're writing inventory, among other things, or when we're explaining our story to someone, we actually relive those experiences. And when you write inventory, you write specifically about selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, so you know what that feels like. So you know when it comes up what it is. I mean, I'm not sure anybody really has a problem identifying that at that point. So it says continue to watch for that. And when you experience it, when you identify it, you ask God at once to remove it. Talk to someone about it, and then it says make amends if you've harmed someone, and then the key behind that is resolutely turning your thoughts to someone you can help. But here's what we do. We have what we call 10-step buddies. Here's how you get a 10-step buddy. You go up to somebody that you trust, and you say, how would you feel if I use you to 10th step? And hopefully they'll know what you're talking about, but if they don't, say, if I start feeling or if I start engaging in one of these things that's symptomatic of alcoholism, I need to call you and tell you what's going on, and ask them if they'll agree to listen. Now, I've got about a half a dozen people, but most of the 10 steps I do with 2 people. One guy I've been 10-stepping with for over 30 years. Now, they get a pretty good look at who you are. What you do, now, out of those 4 things that I keep mentioning, the more likely thing that you're going to 10-step about is fear. That's the primary offender. Dishonesty, selfishness, dishonesty, and resentment are, they'll pop up, but fear is the big one. So let's say that I get in fear about business. Let's say a customer is going, well, you got to do this, or I'll get somebody else. What I do is I call up one of these 10-step buddies, and and say, do you have a moment? And he'll say yes, and he'll say, I'm in fear. I talked to my customer. He said that he absolutely has to have this. I don't want to do it because my expenses are going to go up, and I don't think there's a commensurate increase in revenues, and I don't want to lose the customer, and I'm in fear about it. And he'll say, the first thing he'll say is, did you ask God to remove it? That every time. Because sometimes I just forget. God, please remove my fear. Did you harm the guy in the process? And say no. And then he'll say, did you resolutely turn your thoughts to someone you can help? Those 3 questions if somebody calls you to 10-step, and believe me, once you go to someone and you start 10-stepping, they'll start doing it back. Okay? Almost always. And the third question is, did you turn your thoughts? Okay? So, and then what generally happens is they'll give you perspective. They'll say exactly what happened, and you tell them, and they go, it doesn't sound like a problem to me. And a lot of times, because we have this mind that allows us to, or that gives us unrealistic perspectives, they can lend some sanity to what we're looking at. So I've called someone. I told them what one was bothering me. He asked me if I'd ask God to remove it, so that I do that right away if I haven't done it. Most of the time I've done it before I call. And then I check to see if I owe an amend. And then here's the trick. The trick is to resolutely turn my thoughts to someone I can help. Why would they say that? Huh?
Get out of yourself.
Right. Selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear make me turn inward. And as soon as I turn inward, I'm obsessed with myself again. And as soon as I'm obsessed with myself, I can't be of any service to you. I can't do what God wants me to do. I mean, I've placed myself in a position where I'm locked down. So I have to turn my thoughts to someone I can help. So it's curious because it doesn't say go help them. It just said think about them. Now, you can go help them if you want to. But all it's saying is, think about helping somebody. So, maybe somebody I'm sponsoring, I need to encourage him to write inventory, or I need to encourage him to make amends, or whatever. So I'll get on the phone and I'll say, I know it's really important for you to stay in the process here, and I know you're balking. What can I do to help you move forward? And as soon as I have turned my thoughts, as soon as I have engaged in that process, I'm out of myself. And that's why we do it. Okay? How many times during the day or during the week do you get all bent out of shape about something that's going on? Well, this is what you do with it. Okay? I mean, you're all responding like, yeah, that happens to me. If it's happening to you, there's an antidote to that. And the antidote is the 10th step. And it has the ability to take us out of that sort of mental whirligig that we get into. And I don't think that you like that any more than I do. I mean, that's an unpleasant experience. Go ahead.
Quick question.
Sure.
I'm assuming that the people we can help could also be family members, etc. It doesn't need to be program-oriented.
You're absolutely right. Yep. Doesn't have to be a drunk. It can be anyone. The trick is to get out of your own head. So, you know what? I could help if I had a dog, I could help my dog. You know, if the dog had hip dysplasia or something and like to get up on the couch or whatever, I could go over there and get the dog up on the couch and put it on a pillow and pet it and do all the rest of that, and I'd be out of my head.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes.
So, Bob, are these like best friends? Well, these could be like your best friends in recovery that you're running by when you're calling them your buddies. Are you saying, are they more like just AA people you know that'll tell you this? Well, sometimes my AA buddies are the ones who tell me straight up. So.
Yeah,
Yeah, tell me.
Well, only because I don't have, a whole rack of best friends. I just, I've always been kind of a loner, but there are a number of people in Alcoholics Anonymous who I trust with this kind of information, which doesn't mean that I trust them with everything. All right? Now, that I don't want to sound like I'm trying to split hairs here. But most of the people, there are people in Alcoholics Anonymous that you can trust with some things and can't trust with other things. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
So,
I guess what I'm asking you is, it could be your friend.
yeah, absolutely.
That you trust to tell you absolutely the truth.
Yeah.
That you're willing to tell them the truth.
Yep. And as long as the two people that I 10-step with primarily, one guy's been sober for 35 years, so he's a guy. I wouldn't walk a girlfriend in front of him because he thinks that if I'm dating someone, he ought to make a pass at her. But that's a sort of thing that he has. I don't know. So I don't do that. It's like having a dog that bites. All right? you really like the dog, but you don't want to put him down, and you don't want to get rid of him.
Yeah.
So you never put him in a position where he can bite you. Doesn't mean you don't like him. It just means you're a little careful with him. Well, I feel the same way about people.
Hi, Bob. Lucinda, alcoholic. A question for you, and that is: so, take a problem, say a resentment, and would you just go through the 4-step list first? The 4-step list first.
10-step.
No, would you do the 4th-step list first, or would you go right to the 10th and just skip the list? I have the resentment, the columns.
I don't do that.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Well, because yesterday, when we were talking, you said something about, put my name on the list. So I didn't know if that was a invitation. I mean, if I had a resentment, sometimes I need to know a little more than just go on, and so I'll go to the list format rather than do a whole inventory. But I didn't know what your process was. That's all I needed clarification.
Okay. What I do, I don't do. I do the 4-step once a year, but roughly. I mean, it isn't like, well, it's the 10th of July. I need to write inventory. But usually my ego catches up with me. It's called outrunning your 10th step, incidentally. By that time, my ego's caught up to me, and I've outrun my 10th step, which means that I've got all these resentments. No matter how often I use 10, 11, and 12, my ego has rebuilt itself, and I need to move forward. I only write inventory once a year, and I only use that format once a year. Usually. I mean, unless something big happens. So what I do is if I feel like I'm in selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, or fear, I also know why I'm in it. I mean, I know who to aim that at, and usually it has something to do with somebody else. So I'll call up somebody and say, well, let's say it's a resentment instead of fear. Say, I resent the hell out of somebody. And the reason why is because they did this, this, and this. If it's a person and a resentment, the guy on the other end of this 10th step is probably going to ask me a few extra questions. Where were you selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened? You're going to come up in the middle of that. And then the standard questions about, did you ask God to remove it? Do you owe an amend? And did you turn your thoughts? And that's what happens. But the 10th step, those are the instructions, and the 4th step has a whole separate set of instructions. And I don't mix those up. All right? Yes.
I'm Joanne. I'm an alcoholic. Just for my own clarification on the 10-step buddy,
yes.
Should it be our sponsor or someone that's familiar with the 10-step in AA, or can it be somebody outside the program that we totally trust?
Yeah. You're right on the first two. You can use a sponsor. I mean, I use 10-step with my sponsor a lot, which is why he said, how the hell would you know so often? Today, I'm more likely to go to these friends that I have in the program that I trust. And I probably listen to 3 or 4 10 steps a day from different people. Most of them in my home group, because our whole group does that. And the reason why is you can either sit around and hold on to that stuff, or you can talk to somebody about it. So it really has to do with what's your tolerance to pain. Okay? You can either sit in that whirligig, or you can call somebody up. And if you have an understanding friend who will, like this guy that I 10-step with most often. Guy's 35 years sober. He's known me since he came into AA. And we've been 10-stepping for over 30 years, and I know this guy so well. I probably know more about him than anyone in the world. And I know what his idiosyncrasies are, I suppose is the best term. So, when he calls up, unless there is some terribly compelling reason to the contrary, I'll drop everything and listen to it. I called him, and he'll do the same thing. Now, I called him the other day and said, I'm angry. And he said, why? This was Tuesday morning, see? And I'm sitting in an operating room, 10-stepping. And he said, are you afraid? And I said, no, I'm angry. And he said, why are you angry? And I said, because I'm sick of having these surgeries on my face. And so he had, did you ask God to remove it? Do you owe an amend? And have you turned your thoughts? And so I sat down and thought about somebody I thought I could help. And then they did the surgery. And my mind was changed by the time I got in surgery. I had a nice friendly conversation with the surgeon while the thing was going on. And and he said, well, that tumor's about 2 inches long. And I said, well, that's disappointing. And he said, so I'm going to have to take a big chunk out of your cheek, but I'll pull that back together and you won't have a noticeable scar. This really good surgeon and he said, but you keep coming over here having all these little cancerous things cut off of your face, I'm going to start charging you for cosmetic surgery. Because they keep pulling it together. Right. Huh?
That's why you're so youthful looking.
Thank you. Well, they cut a piece out about that wide and about that long. And yeah. Well, I don't notice. I mean, I'm just laying there going, wow, everything's cool. And so anyway, that's what the 10-step thing looks like. And I would encourage you to do that. I've been doing it for a long time. And this is really about if you don't like pain. Okay? I mean, if you want to just sit in pain because it makes you feel powerful or whatever, go ahead and do it. But you're going to find out that it'll just wear you out. Okay? So don't do that. Get someone you can talk to. Now, if you're like me and you're kind of a loner, you probably don't want to tell everybody else. You don't want to hang your laundry out there. Now, I'll tell you what. New people in AA don't 10-step. They do. They're too busy protecting their ego. All right? One of the freedoms, one of the many freedoms that I have in Alcoholics Anonymous is the ability to tell someone exactly what I'm thinking no matter how crazy it is. Because I don't care. I mean, that's who I am, and if they don't like it, then they can tell me they won't take my 10 steps anymore. But see, I'm not afraid to show myself to people. And I'm not obsessed with what they think. Curiously enough, those people that I 10-step with the most are my closest friends today. And they 10-step with me, and I don't make judgments about that. You know, if somebody calls me up and go, this guy is from Chicago. He's 6'6" and 240 pounds, and looks like somebody just chiseled him out of a piece of granite. And probably the meanest guy I ever met in my life. And I've been his sponsor now for 20 years. And he called me up one day, and he said, "I'm going nuts." And, my mind went, "You were nuts a long time ago. There's nothing new." You're not going anywhere. You're just starting to understand where you are. And I didn't want to tell him that because it's rude, And I said, "Tell me about it." And he said, I'm wired so tight I feel like I'm going to explode. And that's not somebody you want to explode anywhere near you. Because I had seen him. When he was drinking, he played softball in softball leagues. And almost every game he'd go pick out the biggest guy on the other team and just beat him senseless. And big Polish guy. And he called me up and he said, I'm going nuts. I feel like my head's going to explode. I don't know what to do. And I said, "How much coffee are you drinking?" And he said, "I had 2 pots this morning." My intuition just told me to ask that question, and one of the things that I also hope you do, just as an aside, is to understand how powerful a tool your intuition is, and how much you can learn to trust it. It's absolutely spooky. So when you have an extra minute, think about your intuition and think about trusting it. Now I'll tell you a story in a minute about trusting your intuition. So I said, "You might want to think about cutting down the coffee consumption." And so he did, and now he'll drink a pot of coffee in the morning, but it's almost all decaf. And this guy, women thought it was fun to get around him until things got ugly, but he was a big bad guy, and there are women who are attracted to guys like that. And So anyway, today he's married. He's a general contractor, he's a plumbing contractor up in Vail, and he's got 3 daughters, and they're all damn near as tall as he is, and all getting volleyball scholarships from Division I schools around the country. And the guy's a cupcake today. He absolutely is. I mean, people still look at him and go, "Jesus, I hope he doesn't get mad." But that's what happens. And so here's a short story. Trust your intuition. The intuition is a small, confident voice in your head. And it'll more likely, almost always, tell you that you can do something. And it encourages you to try. It's not like the ego, which is loud and brash and tells you you're going to screw everything up. So the intuition will tell you to go ahead. When people run around in Alcoholics Anonymous going, "I don't know what the proper thing to do is. I need to make some decisions. I just can't. I don't know what to do. What's God's will?" I'm all hung up on how to determine God's will. Your intuition will tell you what God's will is if you listen to it. So this guy, he's dead now, but they called him Big Frank. He was in Denver. His name was Frank McGibbon. He was 6'6". He had been drafted by the New York Football Giants. He was a 6'6" and about 270 maybe. And he was the nastiest, most abrasive, in-your-face kind of. He was an attorney, and he'd just come up and challenge it. He was the guy that said, "What are your principles?" And I said, "Well, I'd have to think about that." And he said, "If you don't know what they are, you don't have any." Well, I see you're a lot of fun. And he'd say, "What do you stand for?" Oh, my. And he'd ask you if you had the courage of your convictions. If you see some sort of silly, stuff going on in Alcoholics Anonymous, do you have the courage to stand up for it? You either believe this stuff or you don't. You either agree with the book or you don't. And he would ask you questions all the time that would challenge what you believe, which I think is wonderful. It's just a little uncomfortable. So he said, "Do you trust your intuition?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "If God told you in your intuition to give all the money in your pocket to somebody on the street, would you do it?" And I said, "I don't know." Okay. About 2 years later, I'm walking down the street in Los Angeles. And here comes this bum. All right? The guy's a derelict. I mean, you can tell. Street people. Looked like he'd had some brain damage, actually. And my intuition said, "Give him money." And I'm going, no. This spiritual make-believe here, right? This isn't real. And my intuition goes, "No, this is real. Give him money." And I had like $300 in my pocket, and I needed about $60 to get back to John Wayne and airport. And so I took like $220 out. I had to have enough money for cab fare to get to the airport. And when the guy came up to me, I said, "Excuse me," and he looked at me like, he wasn't interested in what I was up to anyway. And I said, "This is yours." And I handed him $200 and some bucks. And then I walked away from him. I thought the proper thing to do was just walk away and don't look back. And my part of that was over with. And so I walked about half a block, but my curiosity overcame me. And I had to look. And the guy was right where he was when I gave him the money. Except he was on his knees like this. So, what do you do with that? That was the right thing to do, and I know that. But at some point, your intuition, and probably more often than you think, your intuition is going to tell you to do something that seems absurd. And you're going to need to do it. And the only way you're going to figure that out is by following it. You may do some very strange things in the beginning trying to follow your intuition, but what the book says is that it gradually becomes a working part of the mind, and that we can trust it. So that's what you do. If you're trying to do the right thing and follow your intuition, God's not going to let you get too far afield with it. Now, this all sounds like, voodoo kind of AA. But this is a spiritual way of life. And you either engage in it or you don't. And you either trust it or you don't. You either try it or you don't. It's a lot of fun. I haven't found any lies in the big book. I think the closest thing to a lie in the big book was Bill Wilson saying that there were times when he was saved from making a mistake with some other woman by his drunkenness. I don't believe that for a minute. So we'll wait until you're done. Okay. It's all right. Everyone enjoys it. So if you want to make an adventure out of this, make a spiritual adventure out of your experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, there are the most outrageous things to do, and one of the most outrageous is finding out about your intuition. So, were you going to say something?
Oh, wait. Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Joanne, alcoholic. I want to throw a little spice into this intuition thing. I always felt that I had a really strong intuition, and then in my recovery, my short recovery, it's been brought to my attention by various people that I'm codependent. So is it intuition or is it codependency? I have a real problem with that, and I feel that it's detrimental to my intuition and using my intuition, because I'm always second guessing now, am I supposed to do it? Am I not supposed to do it? Is it God? Is it a codependency? And I'm a strong believer in helping, and so I just want to throw that in there.
Okay. The way you find out about that is through trial and error. Let me tell you something that my sponsor used to do to me, that because I would want him to solve problems for me, and I wasn't above asking him those kinds of questions. Is this intuition, or is this self-will, or what the hell is it? And I would call him up and say, Don, my boss is really mad at me and sent me this letter. It must have smoked all the way out here, and he's really angry about this or that, and I'm worried about my job, and I'm not sure how to respond, so what do you think I ought to do? And then I would expect him to solve my problems for me and to define the situation. So we would talk about it, and kind of turn it around like this and that, and do all the rest of this. Not at any point would he give me an answer, but we just sort of discuss it. And then at the end of the conversation, he'd say, "Why don't you pray about it and do what you think?" All right. So I'd go, okay. So I'd pray about it and then just do what I thought. And then I would have that same kind of conversation with him again. We'd turn it around, look at it from different directions, and then he'd say, "But I think you ought to pray about it, Bob, and do what you think." And I'd say, okay, and I'd pray about it and do what I thought. What he was doing was he was preventing me from becoming dependent upon him. And he was making me turn to God instead of somebody else, someone. And what he was doing was teaching me to trust my intuition. And I had to do that by trial and error, but so does everyone else. And so one of the things that my sponsor told me was, don't rely on me, rely on God. I'm just a drunk. I'll walk with you. But don't ask me to make decisions for you. You have a device for learning the truth. And the truth is, in that device is your intuition. So the answer to your question is trial and error. Well, take a look at it. Make a decision. Go and say, all right, I think that this is my intuition, or instead of your codependency. Or you can say, this is my codependency, in which case you won't do whatever it is that you're inclined to do. If you believe that it's your intuition, go ahead and do it and see what happens. Here, I guess we're going to talk about a lot of stuff here. But people are terrified of making decisions. It's based on a false premise. The false premise is, if I make this decision, it's the last decision I'm ever going to make, and it's the most important. So here's the truth about that. Make a decision. If it doesn't work, make another decision. Okay? It's as simple as that. Yes. Just a minute. Oh, okay. You were first. You're first.
My name is Teresa. I'm alcoholic.
Teresa.
And what I heard you say just a few minutes ago was, believe in our convictions or whatever it is.
Yes.
And I'm very opinionated sometimes.
God bless you.
And so I struggle with elder statesman and I can't even remember what it says. Leading deacon. And so I was wondering how you go from there to there to become. My sponsor has told me how, but I want to hear what you have to say.
About being either an elder statesman or a bleeding deacon? In my home group, I'm asked to speak a lot because that's the nature of it, because I'm one of the most visible members of that group. The other groups I go to, I rarely talk. And the reason why I do that is because if I talk all the time, nobody else is going to get to talk. Now, I wind up doing this for a week, and I get back, I don't want to talk to anybody. I will rise to this sort of bleeding deacon status periodically if I think that somebody ought to say something. I mean, we're way too polite, from my view. And we're all running around trying to protect our egos so nobody thinks we're a jerk. And so you'll see something going on in an AA meeting that makes no sense at all. Where someone's trying to run some sort of bullshit in an AA meeting that doesn't fit with the program, nobody will say a thing. Because somebody might be offended. Oh, shit. You know what? Somebody here better have some cojones, yeah. I don't want to use that term because that implies gender, but I think that we should be outspoken in defending Alcoholics Anonymous. And so occasionally I get up and usually piss off half the room. And I don't care. At least they know somebody will take a position. And most of the time we'll sit around like these shy, retiring little people who are terrified that we're going to offend somebody. Well, they don't think that, they don't care if they offend somebody. Every time somebody runs one of those things in a meeting, they offend the hell out of me. And if they're going to talk, I guess I get to also. The rest of the time I don't. And sometimes I'll go to meetings and people go, why don't you talk more often in this meeting? And I want to sit back here. If you want me to say something, ask me, but otherwise I just want to sit in the meeting and enjoy it. And that's an elder statesman. That's talking when you're asked.
Right. One of the things that, and I was going to just say that, but then it hurts my feelings when people get mad, even though I know that it's Alcoholics Anonymous that I'm standing up for, I get my feelings hurt, because people don't like me. So what? Huh?
Do you know when I came out here that people said, "What's the conference about?" And I said, "Emotional sobriety." And they went, "Are you kidding? You're going to talk about emotional sobriety?" And excuse this expression, but they said, "You're the king of fuck your feelings." You know what? So let's talk about that for a minute. Your feelings and your spiritual condition have no relationship at all. Some of the most spiritual times that I've had in Alcoholics Anonymous were when I was in the worst trouble, when I was under emotional fire and felt like the top of my head was going to come off. And those were some of the most spiritual times that I had. I grew more spiritually because I had to turn to God under those situations, and I found out that I truly could trust God, which is a very difficult concept for me. So trying to take your spiritual temperature by how you feel is a mistake. They just aren't related, but we have this inclination to do that. And see, you don't like confrontation. That's what you're talking about. You don't like confrontation because you think somebody's going to have the wrong opinion, or you're going to think you look bad, or whatever. But I'll tell you, there are times when you need to speak up. Now, I'll give you an example. There was a lady that came to a meeting, and this probably 20 years ago. I'm sitting in this meeting, and this woman comes in, and she'd been in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for like 10 years. And she came into the meeting and started weeping immediately. And about 3 or 4 of the women in the group went over there and started petting her, and they were going around the room. And when it got around to me, see, I pray before I say something. So I said, "God, help me to do the right thing here." And I said, "My name's Bob Olson, and I'm an alcoholic. And I guess what I'd like to say is to that lady that's getting petted in the back there, that's got her head stuck so far up her ass, she's probably going to die from this disease." Whoa. And I mean, everybody looked around at me like, "Oh my God, here he goes again." And when I said this lady that's got her head stuck up her ass, her head came straight up, like somebody had poked her with an electric prod or something. And she sat up and looked at me like, "Did you just say that?" And then the meeting went on, everybody went home and all, and I forgot about it. I ran into her in a meeting about a year later. And she came up, she said, "Bob, I'd like to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "You remember when we were in that meeting and you told me I had my head stuck in my backside?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "That's the only thing I heard in that meeting." And that day, I put myself in a treatment center, and I've been sober ever since. All right? Well, everybody in that meeting thought I was probably the biggest jerk in the city. And I don't care. Because one of the freedoms I have today is not being affected by other people's opinions. I know what I do. I know what I'm required to do. I know that there are times when I am willing to risk my reputation or whatever that is by standing up and saying something that sounds really rude just to yank somebody out of their own alcoholism. And that's the question that I have to ask to you. Do you have the courage to go do that? And that doesn't mean that we should go out and openly abuse people. That's not the point. Oh, darn. The people that I see doing the most good in Alcoholics Anonymous are the people that speak the truth. And sometimes, now, let me say something else about that. The truth without compassion is abuse. So you need to be compassionate in the way you present that, but it's still the truth, and it'll still make people sit straight up. This is a deadly disease, and having someone dying right in front of you in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and having everyone so concerned about their own egos that they won't say anything, is a terrible travesty. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, do I have the courage to take a position? Ask yourself that. And see, in my home group, somebody will come in and run some kind of silliness in there, and they'll go, "Why didn't you say something?" Right? Wait a minute. Why the hell didn't you say something? And I said, I'm not going to say it all the time. If you don't have the courage to say something, you shouldn't even be here. You know, you want me to go do all that stuff. And you've been around for 10 years, so why the hell don't you stand up and do something? Why don't you have the courage to take a position? Why don't you defend what's right? If you don't learn that, I can sit here and be an example of that, but if you don't find the courage to do exactly the same thing, you're not much of an AA member from at least my point of view. So, you know, and you can agree or disagree with me. And everything I've told you this weekend is an opinion, except what came out of the Big Book, which is a lot of what I said. So you get to make your own decisions, and you get to be whoever you want to be, and I'm just telling you what I do. And you can agree with it or disagree with it, or say he's full of shit, or I think that's right, or whatever it is. And you get to find your own way in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm just telling you what I did. I can tell you that some things work for me and some things don't. And that I don't want to die not knowing the truth. And so I continue to seek it. And it may take me down a different road than it takes you down. But I think being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous takes a lot of courage. And I think that we have to adopt a set of principles and then rigorously live by those principles. And in the midst of all that, even having a strong set of principles, we need to have an open mind. So the questions have to do with, are you willing to change your mind? Is your mind open? You know, if I say something you don't like, did your mind snap shut? Are you willing to get in here and find and continue to challenge everything you believe? You know, as soon as you think that everything you believe is right, you're messed up. You are. What's the only solid truth? You know, my kids came home and asked me that question. And they must have been in a philosophy class or something. And the twins came home one day, and we're sitting there having dinner, and one of them looks at me and says, I need to know a universal truth. Huh? And I said, okay, where'd that come from? And he said, high school. And I said, so you want something that's absolutely dependable? And he said, yeah. And I said, something that never changes, something that is universally true. And he said, yes. And I said, there's only one thing in the world like that. Yeah. And he said, what is it? And I said, God is. Yeah? And everything else is open to interpretation. So, let me just say a couple of quick things about 11 and 12. 11's about discipline. And it says it's about discipline. And it tells you what to do when you retire at night. And if you looked at my book, and it's already in my suitcase, but if you looked at my book, you'd see that all the pages are falling out of it. Okay? But especially around the 11th step. Because for years I would put it on a nightstand, and I would open it up every morning and every night and follow the directions. And a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous that actually work steps, their books will fall apart right there. That they have to have them rebounded because all those pages are falling out. So it tells you what to do in the morning. Ask God to keep our day free from self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. It's a whole set of directions there about what to do in the morning. Then there are instructions in there about what you do during the day. We pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. The whole business about get a mental blank spot. Saying many times each day, thy will not mine be done. I'm not running the show anymore. And then it tells you what you do that's what you do in the morning. At night you review your day. See if you've harmed anyone. See if you engage in selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, or fear. So we call that the evening review, and you just sit there and open your book and follow the directions. Ask yourself the questions, and it talks about not falling into what is it? I've been doing this too long. No, it's come on, folks. Yeah. No?
Actually, badgering is
it's about getting down. Yeah.
morbid reflection.
Yep. It's about getting down on yourself. And that's, if you sit there and you see that you made mistakes during the day, you can get in this mood about, I'm never going to get this right. And the truth is that as long as you're doing it, you're doing it.
That's right.
And if you make mistakes, ask God to remove them, show you how to get rid of that stuff and move on. And that's part of your 11th step. And it's about discipline. And the book says that it is about discipline, and in this way God disciplines us. So there, one of the things in the morning is looking at our plans for the day. Okay? And so what we do is we make plans at night, and then it says review our plans for the day. So what we do is we make plans at night. And I'll either do it on a legal pad or on a Palm Pilot or whatever it is. And I'll put down 10 or 12 things I want to do the next day before I go to bed at night, and then when I get up in the morning I review them. That's not only a good spiritual thing, that's a good business thing. All right? So making your plans for the day, and the reason why is most drunks, when they get out of bed in the morning, they go, oh shit, what's going to happen today? Well, when I get out of bed in the morning, I already know, because it's planned. And I can tell you that your anxiety level will go down significantly if you have a plan for the day. All right. So that's about discipline. Working with others depends on how you're going to work with them. You know, if you're going to be their buddy, I don't think that's what a sponsor is at all. That's what it may turn into. But I don't think that the intent is so they can have an extra buddy. If you're going to be a buddy to them, they're going to try and avoid doing the recovery program. I mean, people, we don't come in here going, show me what the steps look like. We come in here trying to get by as easily as we can. And so sometimes you have to demand that these people do some things. And here's what I do. Now, I shouldn't tell you what, I'll tell you what I do. If I see someone that I think I should work with, or if somebody comes up and asks me to sponsor them, I'm going to say, well, there are responsibilities on both sides of this equation, and here they are. I'm going to expect you to go through the 12 steps of recovery, and you can expect me to continue to help you as long as you're interested. And then what I'll do is I'll sit down and I'll explain all 12 steps with them. You can do it in about 30 minutes. You can do a good job of a serious, in-depth explanation of what you're going to ask someone to do, and you can do it in 30 minutes. And one of the first things I ask them is, do you have 30 minutes? And they'll say yes, and they'll say, okay, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. And then I talk about every single step. And at the end of that, I ask them if they're willing to do that. And if they're willing to go all the way from 1 to 12 without stopping. Are you? And I tell them, I've told you everything that I'm going to ask you to do, and I have done all of that myself. A lot. And if they agree to do that, then we can move forward, and then I start asking them about their alcoholism. And I ask them about craving. I ask them about losing the power of choice and drink. I ask them about if when you honestly want to, you find you can't quit entirely. And I ask them about, or once you begin, do you have little control over the amount you take? And if they can answer all of those, then I'll work with them. And if they can't, I won't. And if you don't agree with it, I don't care. So, you know what? I know what kind of a drunk I am. I used to go to my sponsor and I'd say, Don, some of these guys wouldn't know a step if it fell on them. And I said, they're going to meetings and they've been sober for 5 years and they're hanging around Alcoholics Anonymous and they never engaged in the recovery process. And you got me writing inventory every year and I have to go through all of this stuff. How come I have to do all this stuff and they don't? Doesn't that piss you off? And he said, Bob, you are a really bad drunk. And you're the kind of person that if you don't engage in a spiritual recovery program on a regular basis, you'll wander off and die someplace. And so I don't know what kind of drunks those folks are, but you're one of those kinds of drunks that has to pay attention to this recovery program. And that's who I'm talking to here. Okay? If you're a drunk like me, and you are hopeless and helpless and a babbling drunk, then you might want to think about doing what I do. And not only because you won't drink, but because you'll grow up. And when Bill Wilson talked about emotional sobriety and said that he basically had the emotions of a 17-year-old, he wasn't kidding. And he knew it. And that even though he didn't drink anymore, he didn't grow up. And that at some point he had to become an adult, and he had to become much more rational about his behavior, and that he had to have a whole different view of life. And his question was, how do you do that? Well, by working the steps. And you do it by doing it over and over and over and over ad nauseum. And you keep seeking spiritual growth. And you keep seeking spiritual experiences. And as long as you seek spiritual experiences, you'll have them. Guaranteed. As long as you continue to find the truth, you'll find the miracle. As long as you keep seeking God's help, you'll find the lies. And the lies are what's killing you. But you'll never find them if you don't go looking for them. And if you think that you can succeed in this program without doing any work, you are sadly mistaken. So, you know what? If you're afraid of what you find, so's everybody else. If you're afraid of who you are, go find out who you are to find out whether you ought to be afraid or not. Don't let fear stop you from becoming who you can be. Don't be afraid to take strong positions, please. You know, this thing saved our lives. My God, I mean, I would have been dead 36 years ago. And this saved my life. I have lived a whole extra life because I don't drink anymore. And in the process of that, got fascinated by this spiritual adventure. And continue to seek the truth. And if you don't see what I see today, you may someday. Just keep looking for the truth and see what happens. You're not barking at the moon when you're praying. Okay? It's just, there is a loving God, and sometimes life is easy and sometimes it's not, but it's life. So go out there and vigorously participate in life. If you're cowering in a corner, you're making a mistake. You're allowing fear to rule your life. When you take a look at those things you're most afraid of, you will find that they have no substance at all. That it's just ethereal bullshit. And you don't have to live that way. And see, the problem is that most people don't understand that they don't have to live that way because they've been living that way so long they think it's normal. And if your head runs away with you on a regular basis and you think you're half nuts because of what's going on in your head, change what's going on in your head. You have the power to do that with God's help. But it's going to take some work. And if you're afraid to do the work, stop complaining about what's going on because you have a choice. And it's important for you to know that you have a choice. So anyway, thanks for being a good listener.